Discontent at the FIA is only growing stronger in F1, and the Monaco Grand Prix has not helped things. The criticism of the sport's governing body has been fierce following the heavily delayed Monaco Grand Prix. With F1 actively looking for a way to leave the FIA behind, what did the governing body do so wrong in Monaco? And where does the sport go from here? This story goes back to the 2021 season, when team lobbying of race director Michael Masi got completely out of hand towards the end of the season. Toto Wolff and Christian Horner's radio messages complaining to the race director about decisions and each other's drivers became a constant feature of F1 coverage, to the point where it took away from the actual racing. Of course, the telltale antics culminated in the events at the season finale in Abu Dhabi. It was the most controversial end to a season since Michael Schumacher decided to use his F1 car as a battering ram to win his first ever world title. The outcome was that Michael Masi lost his role as race director, and after a lengthy review of race control working practices, we got a few extra bodies working in the director's box to make the job a bit easier. That was only the beginning though. This season, the teams have been frustrated by the ordering of the Grand Prix throughout the season. Instead of sticking to one continent, finishing the races there and then moving to the next, the FIA have scheduled the season that the teams have to fly laps of the globe just to make it to the start line each week. Not exactly in line with the new environmentally friendly image that F1 want to push, is it? The other thing that has the team managers riled up is a delay on the decision of how many sprint races there will be next year. The teams are unanimously in favour of 6 sprint races, but the FIA has been dragging its heels on agreeing to the proposal. The FIA said in a statement that it was still evaluating the impact of the proposal on its trackside operations and personnel. Sources close to the matter have said that unjustifiable financial requests are behind the FIA's decision to block the vote. The word greed was actually used to me, said Sky Sports' Craig Slater. And a couple of teams said that, in their view, the FIA did not incur significant extra costs by replacing a practice session with a sprint event. They're shocked that the FIA has taken this position. A number of senior figures at the meeting also told me they were bemused at FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem's general attitude. They felt he was more interested in talking about issues like drivers wearing jewelry than some of the major concerns confronting F1. There is growing concern he's not aligned with F1's direction of travel. It certainly doesn't sound like F1 is happy, does it? After an initial delay, announced just minutes before the scheduled start, drivers completed 2 formation laps behind the safety car before conditions got even worse and the red flags were brought out. You think they didn't do a good job? I was not saying it was a mistake. I don't know the reason for them not sending us out at the get-go, but we're Formula 1 drivers, though the weather is not a good enough reason, Hamilton said. That is what I was saying. I was like, let go, when it was just drizzling a little bit at the beginning. We'll talk about it in the driver's briefing, but we should have started the race. Hamilton wasn't the only one asking why there was such a long delay. Max Verstappen asked what are we waiting for, while commentator Jolyon Palmer called it an odd delay, as fans vented their fury on social media. While the delay was perplexing to many people, the race would have been red flagged shortly after the scheduled start anyway due to the rain becoming too heavy for driving. The thing that has got drivers and teams really riled up is that the FIA should not be delaying races on the chance of it raining. In hindsight, it seems like they made the right decision, but at the time, they were really just guessing at what the weather was going to be doing, and in the eyes of many within the sport, that's unacceptable. Holding up a race in anticipation of incoming weather is not necessary, Martin Brundle wrote for Sky Sports F1. We have virtual and real safety cars, red flags, pit stop crews who can change tyres in 2 seconds, and 2 types of wet weather tyres to cover those challenges. That's what Formula 1 racing is all about. A couple of reliable sources tell me there were heated arguments in race control during the impasse as we all looked on unsure of what was happening. This presumably explains the period of inaction and lack of information, and the reason why the safety car was not out exploring track conditions as usual. We'll come back to the arguments in race control in a minute, but let's first talk about the lack of communication. That is another reason that the F1 teams have been incredibly critical of the FIA recently. It came out after the race that the reason we didn't have a proper start on the grid was not because of the weather, but because of the lights on the grid being damaged by the weather. If race control would have just told the teams that, then surely there wouldn't have been an issue. We were informed by the FIA at 8:03 after the race on Sunday that there were power issues on the starting gantry due to the heavy rain, which explains the rolling starts after the red flags, said Martin Brundle. If we had been told this in the media via our simple and effective WhatsApp group, we could have then informed the tens of millions of viewers around the globe and the tens of thousands of fans trackside. and it would all have made a lot more sense. During the first red flag, the race appeared to randomly get underway on the countdown clock, and with a lap showing as completed, there must presumably have been a trigger point. On top of this failure in communication, there were the arguments in race control that we mentioned earlier. While the decision for cars to do 2 formation laps behind the safety car before red flagging the race was being made, apparently there were heated arguments inside of race control. The assumption has to be that there were disagreements among members of race control as to how best to start the race with no lights. A couple of reliable sources tell me that there were heated arguments in race control during the impasse, as we looked on unsure of what was happening. This presumably explains the periods of inaction and lack of information, and the reason why the safety car was not out exploring conditions as usual. Consequently, Brundle feels that the system at race control needs to be examined. The FIA, for the well-being of F1, urgently needs a root and branch change with a fully dedicated and empowered race director with at least one understudy, a dedicated circuit and systems inspector, plus an empowered and effective communications department, he commented. I consider this a highest priority issue. Martin Brundle isn't the only person calling for a review into race management. The team bosses are as well. I think that needs a bit of review because it was all a little chaotic with tyres coming on the grid, off the grid. Red Bull boss Christian Horner explained. It's a busy enough grid here and it's always a little dangerous to try and preempt the weather. You can argue it both ways. You could say we'd have been better starting the race and then reacting to the downpour, and either putting the safety car out or stopping the race. But I think it needs a bit of a review after this weekend. The FIA will do what it can to avoid having to do another review of how race control works over a weekend. It isn't a good look for the governing body. The first review over the winter was meant to have resolved any issues with race control, but things seem to have just gotten worse. Brundle thinks that what happened in Abu Dhabi in 2021 was the consequence of a situation that had been building for some time, and he also believes that the after effects are still being felt. What happened in the championship defining circumstances in Abu Dhabi last year had been brewing up for months, perhaps even years, Brundle stated. And what happened to Michael Massey in the aftermath has made the job a poisoned chalice, and that'll take some fixing, if indeed that's possible. He was the right man for the job, Charlie's understudy, but frankly, F1 and the FIA were winging it at times, and the whole thing skidded off the track with regard to dominant race control and refereeing, which is essential. With the barrage of criticism being leveled at the FIA at the moment, it's hard to see where they're meant to go from here. Any mistake now will be scrutinized much closer than they normally would be. There are always going to be mistakes. The people controlling the race are only human, but those mistakes need to be minimized and the communication has to be better. The sport could already have gone past a point of no return though, where a break from the FIA is now inevitable, instead of being avoidable. Who knows what the break would look like, but at a time when the sport is growing faster than ever before, any break could be disastrous in the short term. Do you think F1 will split from the FIA in the near future? And what should happen to the race control to help it function properly? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. Until we see you next time, drive safe and bye-bye.